So, welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today, as you can see, Ralph Ellis is back, and we will talk about King Arthur. Yeah,
Hmm.
King Arthur is a very interesting story, and as I just mentioned before we started recording, to me, he also represents this archetype of a good leader. And I think many people have this desire to find a good leader. And so I would say he fits that desire and that archetype. What do you think about that?
Yes and no. Surprisingly enough, there were detractors who didn't like Arthur, so we will see that as well. Um, but the main point about the Arthurian story is my version is unique,
Mhm.
completely and utterly unique. And I only came across this because of all the other work that I'd been doing on the gospel story, all of our stories about Edessa. Um, Otherwise, you would never ever dream of this explanation for the Arthurian story because not many people know this in a way. There is no King Arthur. So that's the first little tiny bombshell. If you look at the original text, there is no King Arthur. So we start with Gildas, is our earliest chronicler. This comes from the Dark Ages, late 5th, early 6th century, so very early. Gildas does not mention King Arthur. And he was there at the time. Arthur is supposed to be a Dark Age king, the most famous Dark Age king ever in our lands. And Gildas doesn't know anything about him.
Hmm.
Strange, isn't it? And then you come on to the Venerable Bede, 8th century. He doesn't know anything about King Arthur either. So all of these early chroniclers don't know anything about Arthur. Nennius, 9th century. Well, he has a warrior called Arthur, but he doesn't have a King Arthur. There is no royal court. There is no Lancelot. There is no Guinevere. There is nothing of the story that we know from King Arthur up to the 9th century. Odd. And then suddenly 3 centuries later in the 12th century, so this would be 1125, 1135, something of that nature. Suddenly, we get the entire story, just like that, from William of Malmesbury and, sorry, wrong one, from Walter of Ox. No, yes, I should say before this. Yeah, William of Malmesbury, famous from Glastonbury. He wrote a chronicle of the English kings. This is 12th century, 1125. Um, he mentions again a warlord called Arthur, but no King Arthur. And Henry of Huntingdon, who writes a very good history of the English peoples. Again, he has a warrior called Arthur, but no King Arthur. There is no Arthurian story as we know it, no Camelot and Guinevere and Lancelot, all of that sort of business. And then after those two, suddenly we get Geoffrey of Monmouth and Walter of Oxford, who are basically writing the same story. And suddenly we get the entire Arthurian corpus, all comes out just like that in 1135. The difference between the two, Walter of Oxford is just a very prosaic history of Arthur. Geoffrey of Monmouth has dressed it up a little bit and made it into a much more exciting story, and that's the one that everybody knows about, History of the Kings of Britain, which is the full Arthurian story. But it doesn't come out for like 600 years after this Arthur guy is supposed to have existed, and nobody knows of him prior to that. So there is a problem, a fundamental problem with Arthurian legend, which has never been fully explained until we came to my book. And I'll just do a quick screen share so we can see the book. So that should be coming up now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my Grail cipher. And as I say, this book only came about because of my research into the gospel story and linking Jesus with the kings of Edessa. Otherwise, you would never have known about this whatsoever because it's very obscure. Um, the reason being, when I was doing this research into the gospel story, I kept coming across things that sounded Arthurian, just coming out of the history. And then, of course, you go to the Crusades, and the first Crusade sets off 1096, and it goes across Anatolia, heading out towards the east, and it doesn't go to Jerusalem. Funny that, isn't it? So the first Crusade, the first party of them, they get to Antioch. This is Antioch on the Mediterranean coast. And then they go across the Euphrates. And the first city that they liberate from Muslim control and oppression is Edessa. So here's me. I've been writing about Edessa, for several years. And suddenly I find that the first crusade goes to Edessa. And the first Arththeran manuscripts only arrive after the Crusaders return back to Europe from Edessa. There is a connection here. And the connection, of course, is the Knights Templar and the secrets that the Knights Templar held. What were those secrets? Well, from this emerging story, we're beginning to see that some of those secrets came from Edessa. And if Jesus had been, according to my book, Jesus, King of Edessa, if Jesus had been a prince and a king of Edessa, then of course there would have been secrets to be found in Edessa. And that is what I think they actually discovered and what the Knights Templars actually took back to Europe. And there's many pointers that give us a clue that we're heading in that direction. Because I will just unshare very quickly and we can come back into this. So we have the writing of this story by Walter of Oxford and Geoffrey of Monmouth, 1135. But then we come up to 1160, and we have another very good history. We had some fairly good historians actually in this era. William of Newburgh, The History of English Affairs, again a very readable history of the English peoples. And he says of Monmouth, only a person ignorant of ancient history can for a moment doubt how impertinently and impudently Monmouth falsifies the history in every respect. Whatever Geoffrey has written is a fiction invented either by himself or by others and promulgated either through unchecked propensity for falsehood or a desire to please the Britons. For how could the elder historians, who were ever anxious to omit nothing remarkable and even recorded trivial circumstances, pass by unnoticed so incomparable a man, Arthur, and such surpassing deeds as King Arthur? How could they, I repeat, by their silence, suppress Arthur, a British monarch who was superior to Alexander the Great? So this is only 30 years after the Arthurian story arrived. And William of Newburgh is ridiculing the whole story. He says it's not real, it's fiction. This is not British history. Why is he doing that? Well, because Arthur did not exist. There is no King Arthur. So what is this story? Why did it become so famous? Why was it promulgated quite so readily by influential people? Where did this story come from?
He had his 12 knights, correct?
Yes.
When when I hear 12 knights or 12 helpers or whatever, I automatically think if that has something to do with the 12 houses of the zodiac.
Yes, especially as it's a round table.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We shall come on to that, but yes, you are diving down in the right direction.
Okay.
Yes, this is astronomical. Yes, this is not based on the history of Britain, because we know that it's not really based upon the history of Britain. Because, well, for instance, Thomas Mallory, he's our only British author of Arthurian history, because Monmouth and Oxford, their story is not British. Their story came from Normandy. So it was a French story that Geoffrey of Monmouth was writing. And they say so in their manuscript. They say that they got the manuscript from Brittany, in fact, on the northwest French coast. But Thomas Mallory, he's late. He's one of the much later authors. And he only wrote his story, Morte d'Arthur, because he couldn't find a British story of King Arthur. So all of the texts we have, and there's loads of manuscripts about King Arthur, and they come from Holland, from Greece, from Italy, from Scotland, from Normandy, from Germany, of course, your very famous Wolfram von Eschenbach, German King Arthur. But there's no British manuscripts. So Thomas Mallory wrote his version, and it's a very poor one, I have to say, because he did not know what was going on. He didn't know the underlying story. So I don't rate his manuscript very well at all. But he says in the preface to his book, "For in all places, Christian and heathen, Arthur is reputed. He is more spoken of beyond the sea. More books made of his noble acts than there are in England are made in Dutch, Italian, Spanish, and Greek and French." So this is Thomas Mallory saying he can't find a British manuscript about King Arthur, so I'd better write one. All of the manuscripts come from all over Europe. And they do. And this is the lost history, as it were, of King Arthur that people don't know about. So let's do a little share screen again, and we'll come back into this. There we go. So we're back onto my book. Yeah, we'll look at those in a minute. Let's go down a little bit. It jumps up and down, this thing, sometimes. I'm just searching for pictures, but it jumps instead of gliding from one picture to another. If I do it more slowly, ha, there we go. So the question before I click onto this is, where is the earliest sculpture of King Arthur? And this is very early. This is 12th century. So we're talking a long, long time ago. We're talking about the era when Geoffrey of Monmouth started writing his books, basically. So where would be the first sculpture of King Arthur? Well, quite obviously, it's on Modana Cathedral in northern Italy. And here it is. And it's got the whole Arthurian story here, all in one little frieze. It's got all of the Arthurian knights here. This is Arthur down here. We'll look at this in more detail in a bit. This is King Arthur. You can see my cursor going around, can you?
Hmm.
Good. That's King Arthur. These are his knights. Here are three other knights, and they are besieging the castle. And inside the castle is Queen Guinevere, and she's called Wenlogi here, but it is the same name. It's just a slightly different pronunciation. And Mordred, who this is part of Arthurian history. So the wife of King Arthur elopes with or runs off with either Lancelot or the son of King Arthur, Mordred, and they end up in the Tower of Tears or something it's called. I'll remember what it's called in a minute. Anyway, so they're in this tower and they're being besieged by the Arthurian knights. So this is a well-known piece of Arthurian history. But this is 12th century from Modana Cathedral in Italy, not in Britain, not in Wales, nothing to do with Wales. It's in Italy. And here's King Arthur. He's the only one that's not in, because I don't know if you can see with these. Let me see if I can just zoom in a little. They're all in Norman
Hmm.
armor. You can see Norman chain mail and the Norman kite shields.
Yeah.
So this is traditional sort of uh, dress for Normans of this era. But Arthur's the only one that is not in chainmail and not with a shield. Oh yeah, he does have a shield. There we go. It's on his left arm instead. There we go. But he's not in chainmail. And that's King Arthur. And we know it's King Arthur because it says it above it. You can just see the AR at the top there
Hmm.
for Arthur. All of the names of these knights are on the top of that arch. And here's a close up of the castle. And you can see she's called Wenlogi here. This is Guinevere. And this is Marduk, who's the son of Arthur. And they're locked in this castle.
That sounds
Um,
a little bit like Marduk.
yes, it does. Yes, yeah. There is a connection there, I'm sure. Um, but it's very interesting the location of these sculptures because here's another one. This is Bari in southern Italy. Again, one of the earliest sculptures we have of King Arthur, and this is a copy, slightly more detailed, you might say, an exact copy of what we've just seen from the Modena Cathedral. And again, on the left, you can see the knights here running up. One of those is King Arthur. I think this one is King Arthur. And going up to the castle, and here's the castle. And I love the detail on here because remember, this is 12th century.
Hmm.
And you can see it's got a padlock on the front. This is a 12th century padlock on the front of the castle, so you can't get in. And here's the two characters in the castle, Wenlogi, Guinevere, and Marduk, as they're called here. And again, they're all in, you can see they're in Norman armor, chainmail with the kite shields. So this is Bari in southern Italy. Nothing to do with Britain again. And this is another one. You can see this is a mosaic on the floor, and it's Rex Arturus.
Hmm.
It's King Arthur. So where's this one? This is in southern Italy again. This is Otranto in southern Italy, and it's on the floor of a church, of course. And we've got all of the rest of these characters are something to do with the Old Testament. So we got, Adam and Eve. I think this is Adam and Eve, or it could be Cain and Abel or something. I'll remember it in a bit. But in amongst all of these biblical type scenes, we have the central character is King Arthur. And that's interesting. Why is he mixed up with, he's center of a church, and one of the central characters on the floor of this church is King Arthur on his mythical beast. because he's on a beast. You would have thought they'd have put him on a horse, but he's not. He's on uh, an animal with cloven hooves, we call it, which means it's a cow or a sheep or um, a deer or something of that nature. And you can see it's got horns on it as well.
Are there any similar, yeah, things to see in Britain somewhere?
Nope.
But that's weird.
Precisely. This is the problem that Thomas Mallory was having. All of the manuscripts come from Greece and Holland and Italy and Spain and Germany, and there were no British manuscripts. That's why he was writing Morte d'Arthur, because it's not a British story. Even Geoffrey of Monmouth and Walter of Oxford, their story came from northern France.
Hmm.
And they say so in their manuscript. They say that they got the original manuscript from France and they're repeating it. So, why are all of these stories around Europe? Well, because this is a Crusader story. As I was saying before, the story came back from the Near East, from Edessa, because the first city that was liberated from Muslim oppression back in 1098 on the First Crusade was Edessa. They didn't go to Jerusalem, they went to Edessa. Why on earth would you go to Edessa, which is across the Euphrates in the middle of the Mesopotamia? You would really only do that if you knew something about the history of Edessa. And they probably did. You know, when I was writing even this book, I didn't realize that people in that era did know of Edessa. Um, we have the story of Madame Egeria. This is 5th century. So we're going back quite a long way here. And she was French, I think. She made a pilgrimage on her own. Obviously, she had a retinue, but she was basically going on her own to Edessa. So in that era, Edessa was known as a center of Christianity. That's why she went there. She went to see the tombs of the kings of Edessa. And then coming up to the 10th century, 9th century, 10th century, we have Chronicle of the Saxon Kings. This is Alfred the Great, who is known as the founder of England, as you know, modern England. And this is 10th century. And he was battling with the Saxons. Now, while he was busy battling with the Saxons, he sent the Bishop of Salisbury, which is a big town in southern England, to Edessa and to India to take tribute to the Church of Edessa in India. Now, I didn't actually know anything about this when I was writing my Edessa book. And even when I was writing my King Arthur book, I didn't know anything about this. Despite doing, many searches on the internet, it never actually came up that that Thomas, this is Judas Thomas Didymus, who was the twin brother of Jesus, went to Malabar in India. This was in AD 58. This is very early, a long time ago. I'm just looking for a book. I hope this doesn't come out backwards. It probably will. Yes, it always does.
Yeah, I can
Sorry.
read it. I can read it.
So this is History of the Church of Malabar in southern India, from the time of its being discovered by the Portuguese in 1501. So 500 years ago, this church was discovered in India. And it was the Edessan church in India because Thomas had been to India. As I say, in AD 58, so very early. And I'm just looking for the title page. So this book was printed in 1694, and it's called the History of the Church of Malabar, and it's detailing the same story, that Alfred the Great sent sent tribute by the Bishop of Salisbury to Malabar in India and to Edessa. So even in the 9th, 10th century, the history of Edessa was known. We don't seem to know anything about it, or at least I didn't, when I was writing all of my New Testament histories, that Edessa had been important in that era. But it sounds to me as if it was important in the early 11th century, 11th century, 12th century, when the first Crusades went out there. So it's quite possible that the Crusades didn't go out to free Jerusalem from Muslim control and oppression. They actually went out there to go to Edessa to see what information they could find. And they did find things. So, what are you going to find? You're going to find maybe relics, ancient histories, so a chronicle, maybe some genealogies, things of that nature, maybe tombs, all sorts of things you might be able to find if you think that Christianity's main base during gospel eras had been in Edessa, which is what I'm saying in my book. And so, that's a rationale for the Crusades, why they went out in the first place. That's the rationale for setting up the Knights Templar. And that's an explanation for the fact that Arthurian legend only arrives in 1135 after the Crusade has come back to Europe. And the history of King Arthur is European. It's not Welsh. It's not British. The sculptures of King Arthur are in Europe, and the manuscripts of King Arthur are in Europe, not in Britain. So that was, why I started investigating these similarities and the history of King Arthur, because it's not really as advertised. Let me go back on to sharing. Oh, yes, this is just another image. This is because Monmouth obviously is in Wales, Geoffrey of Monmouth. Now, the Knights Templar who came back from the Crusades includes these two people. This is William Marshall, who was the Earl of Pembroke. Now, he's a Crusader. He's a Knights Templar. You can tell he's a Knights Templar because he's got crossed legs. All of the Templars have crossed legs. So he's come back from the Crusades, and he's from Pembroke, which is just down the road from Monmouth. So this is Wales here in this picture. And here's Monmouth, and here's Pembroke. So just down the road in southwest Wales. So these are the sort of Crusaders who were coming back from the Holy Land at that time.
I thought the crossed legs were also a sign that they fought in Jerusalem.
Yes, possibly. I'm not sure if it's as specific as that. I was told that it was just that they were Templars, and the Templars always have cross legs.
Are you familiar with Walter Scott and Timothy Hogan?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, they have a TV series, Mysteries of the Knights Templar, and
Ah,
I remember they mentioned that.
uh, Walter Scott, he wrote the Hooked X, yes, the book on the
Hmm.
Hooked X, yes. Yeah, some interesting stuff there with histories that go out to America. This image here is fairly important because this is the Vulgate cycle.
Mhm.
10 volumes. And the number of histories of King Arthur that I've read that don't include the Vulgate cycle. I mean, this is huge. I mean, we're talking, you know, 4,000 pages of Arthurian legend here. It just goes on and on and on. There's a whole corpus of history, most of which is there's a lot of chaff and not a great deal of wheat. So you've got to plow your way through an awful lot of text to find something that's interesting. The best of these is the first volume, which is the history of the Holy Grail. Is fairly good. Now, this is summarized quite well in Merlin Grail. This is by the same author. This is by, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit there. I've got a copy here somewhere. This is Boron's book, Robert de Boron, Merlin and the Grail. This is a summary of a lot of what it says in the Vulgate cycle. So rather than plowing your way through the Vulgate cycle, which is very expensive, if you buy the hardback, I think it's about £2,000 to buy the
Mm.
hardback. So you don't want to go and do that. So it's much better to buy this little tiny book, which is a bit of a summary of the Vulgate cycle and quite interesting. So that's always worth looking at. What else do we have here? We've got we've got Parseval, which Wolfram von Eschenbach, most people will know this. Very good history of Arthurian legend, obviously from Germany. This one, he says he's like a Knights Templar, and high history. This is an interesting one. High history is the alternate history of King Arthur. I say this is one of the early ones, which was copied by Chrétien de Troyes and made more palatable, because this is a horrible book. I'll give you a little snippet from High History. This is anonymous. We don't know who wrote this. Anyway, there's a lady who is talking to King Arthur in this book. She doesn't know it's King Arthur. It's just a knight. And she says to him, I was thinking of going to King Arthur's court, but I've met 20 knights, and each of them told me that the court of King Arthur is the vilest in the whole world, and all the knights of the Round Table have renounced it because of its badness. Who cares for Arthur's good beginning when the end is so bad? And it is distasteful that a decent knight such as yourself should have the name of such an evil king.
Mhm.
Yeah. You remember at the beginning, I was saying that there are two views about King Arthur.
Mhm.
Like everything, it depends on what side of your story you are. This, I believe, is the Catholic version, and they didn't like him. Whereas the Arthurian story is what you might call the Enlightenment, the Protestant story. We're seeing this dualism, this battle between the Catholic history of the New Testament and the Protestant history of the New Testament. And obviously the Catholics didn't like him. So although I have to say, I mean, it's got strange things in it, like a knight spearing. A knight flays his wife with a whip, so he takes all the skin off her, and then he gets a lance and thrusts his lance through her heart. And that's supposed to be a parody of the flaying of Jesus and the stabbing of Jesus with a spear on the cross. But it's really gruesome, and it's not exactly complementary to the crucifixion type story. It's a very strange take on all of this. Some of them were very subversively anti-establishment Christian in some respects. They have a king who boils his son and then takes pieces of meat from his son and passes out the pieces of meat to his people.
That is supposed to be a parody. It's not even slightly funny.
Oh, it's not funny at all, no.
No.
Um, but it is a mockery, you might
Mm,
say, of the Eucharist. That's
mm.
exactly what they're doing. They're mocking it. So a lot of this was subversive, anti-Christian. And so you've got to read it from that perspective, that this story is treading on Catholic toes. So that's part of the Arthurian story. And the other part that treads on um, New Testament toes is the author of this story. And this gets very, very strange because you'd never really know about this unless you've dived deeply into Arthurian history. Anyway, so yes, we've got the good knight who is Percival. Percival is one of the knights of the Round Table. So Percival was of the lineage of Joseph of Arimathea. So of course from the gospel stories. And this Joseph was Percival's mother's uncle that had been a soldier for Pontius Pilate for 7 years. Of this lineage was the good knight. For the sake of this high history, this comes from high history. And Iglaze was his mother's name, and King Fisherman, the Fisher King, was his uncle. And the head of his lineage was on his father's side was Nicodemus. Nicodemus was again the person who came to the cross. But Percival is not just of this line; he is the nephew of Joseph of Arimathea. But Percival is a knight of the Round Table. But we're talking about the 1st century here. We're talking about Percival being a 1st century character and not a Welsh character or a British character or even a European character, but a character from the Near East, from Judea. And this is one of the primary knights of the Round Table, Percival, who is a 1st century knight. And we get it again with the ancient donkey. So King Hermit, who is one of the primary kings, he's one of the fisher kings, came from the forest and could not find his nephew. His nephew is Percival in the hermitage. He is right sorrowful, and he mounted a white mule that he had there. She had a star on her forehead in the shape of a red cross. Josephus, the good clerk, tells us that this same mule belonged to Joseph of Arimathea at the time that he was Pontius Pilate's soldier, and he had bequeathed her to King Peles. So they had the donkey that belonged to Joseph of Arimathea. Again, this is 1st century, and they're talking about events in Judea. This is all in Arthurian legend.
Hmm.
And then it goes on because, I mean, people have known about this for quite some time. I've got an inquisitive dog who's making a.
Yeah, I
There we
hear
go.
his little bell.
Yes. um, so Nitza, who's I think he's American, although he's called Nitza. He's obviously of German descent. This is from 1903. He wrote a dissertation. He's almost the father of Arthurian legend research. 1903, and he writes, because he knows all about this. It runs all the way through history of this same problem runs through history of the Holy Grail as well. This is part of the Vulgate cycle. They have the same problem in that volume as well. So he says the role of Josephus, because we have two characters within Arthurian legend. We have Joseph of Arimathea and Josephus, who is the son of Joseph of Arimathea. Yeah, okay, confusing to start with, and familiar names. Anyway, so he says the role of Josephus is of greater importance in our work in Arthurian legend than that of Joseph of Arimathea. It is Josephus to whom we owe the tale. It was Josephus who wrote all of Arthurian legend. Yeah, this is what Nitza is saying. And he is known as the good clerk and the good hermit. Twice the texts call him simply Joseph, and twice he is called Josephus. Nevertheless, it is now generally supposed that the confusion of these two Josephs, Joseph of Arimathea and Josephus Flavius, the Jewish historian, gave rise to the legend of Joseph and his son Josephus, as mentioned above. Yeah, okay. So we're really deep in the weeds here, and he doesn't sort this out because he doesn't realize that Joseph of Arimathea is Josephus Flavius. That's one of the findings I had in my previous books, that they are the same person because they both take Jesus down from the cross. You remember it's Joseph of Arimathea in the gospel story who takes Jesus down from the cross. Well, Josephus Flavius says he did the same. So this is after the Jewish revolt. Remember, this is 40 years later in my version. These events happened in the AD 60s, AD 70. So in AD 70, Josephus Flavius says he is coming back from Tekoa into Jerusalem, and he sees the three leaders of the Jewish revolt being crucified, one of whom, of course, is Jesus of Gamala. And so he goes to the governor, who happens to be Titus at the time, and gets permission to take them down early. He does. They're given medical assistance. Two of them die, and one of them survives. Quite clearly, this is a retelling of the crucifixion story. Mm-hmm. So Joseph of Arimathea is most probably Josephus Flavius, because Josephus Flavius's real name is Josephus Bar Matthias. That's his real name before he became a Flavian. So Joseph Arimathea, Josephus Bar Matthias. They even have pretty much the same name. So this is why we get this confusion, and we get this 40-year chronological chasm, as I call it, because the Gospels say that all of these events were in AD 30, and I say all of these events were in AD 70. And we have this 40-year chasm between the two, and it really mucks up the chronology. And I think this is why we get the two Josephuses in Arthurian legend. So we get Joseph of Arimathea, and then his son called Josephus. But the text mixes these two up quite a lot. Why? Well, because I think they are actually the same person. The son and the father are actually talking about the same person. But to separate them out because of the chronological chasm, they've ended up with a father and son. And that's why Nitza is saying, and I'll quote here from Nitza again, it is now generally supposed that the confusion of these two Josephs, Joseph of Arimathea and Josephus Flavius, the Jewish historian, gave rise to the legend of Joseph and his son Josephus, as mentioned above. So even Nitza is saying that this confusion is caused by people not realizing that these two characters are actually one character. So Joseph of Arimathea is Josephus Flavius. But it goes on because Arthurian legend is confusing. I'll just tell you, it's utterly confusing. Deliberately confusing because they wanted to bury this information with little shards of gold in amongst all of the rubbish. So within the haystack, there will be little tiny needles in the haystack that you've got to go and search for. Because a lot of it is just turgid nonsense, and you've got to go and find the little shards of illumination. So Brugger is another Arthurian researcher and historian. Brugger, I'm just trying to remember. I think he's German. Anyway, I seem to remember translating this out of the German. So again, he's early 20th century Brugger. And he says about Josephus Flavius, he says, because even if Josephus Flavius was very well known as a historian and even very much respected and held as a Christian historian, it remains striking that he could record events from British history that occurred many centuries after his death. I think these oddities are only a result of a confusion. And that's by Ernst Brugger. Yes, he's German. Comes from Zeitschrift für französische Sprache und Literatur.
Zeitschrift für französische Sprache und Literatur, ja.
That one, yes. 1906, that was written.
Mhm.
So he's saying that he cannot believe that this is true because he can't imagine that it can be true because he doesn't know the history that I've teased out of the gospel story. But basically, when you go through all of these books, especially the history of the Holy Grail from the Vulgate cycle, it says that the original author of Arthurian legend was Josephus Flavius.
Mhm.
And that's a problem, of course. It also says it in this one here, Merlin and the Grail, which is nice little easy thin one to read. Yes, so the original author of Arthurian legend was Josephus Flavius. And that turns the whole of this story upside down. That is why it is not a British story. It is a Near Eastern story. It is the gospel story, rewritten by Josephus Flavius, who is writing now, instead of his gospel story, which is a Roman story, a spiritual King Jesus written for the Romans, so he has to be pro-Roman for what became Christianity. I call it simple Judaism, but it obviously became Christianity.
Mhm.
But while he was writing that, he wrote the whole history of the Near East, which we have the Jewish wars and his life and his antiquities. He wrote all of those as secular works, historical works. But it looks like he also wrote a secular gospel history, which we know as Arthurian legend. So King Arthur is King Jesus. It's the same story. And going back to what you said before, this is why we have, let me scroll down the pictures a bit. There we go. This is why we have the Zodiacs.
Mhm.
which you were talking about. You saw the comparison immediately. Um, Within Arthurian legend, you have the 12 Knights of the Round Table. With King Jesus, you have the 12 disciples of the Last Supper table. Now, the connection there, especially from this book, is fairly certain. They say there were three tables that were made. The first table was the table of the Last Supper, and it was a round table. It wasn't, like Leonardo da Vinci portrays it. It was a round table. But of course, that round table is a zodiac. So you have the Jesus character in the center, surrounded by his 12 constellations of the zodiac, or surrounded by his 12 disciples of the circular Last Supper table. And these were very common. This is another one. This is a very good one. This is the Sepphoris
Could it
zodiac.
be, excuse me, just briefly, could it be that Da Vinci chose the rectangular table because he wanted to paint everybody from, you know,
Yes,
the
one side
front?
looking at it.
And then when
Um,
you look at it, he has them in 333, separated a little bit.
he does that. That's true. I'm wondering if he actually knew that the Last Supper table was a zodiac,
I
that
think
it
so
was
because
circular.
he has this spring, summer, fall, winter. You can see that when you look at his picture that
Mm,
and they are always a little bit in three, in a group of
yes,
three, the
yes.
disciples. Mm.
I'm surprised he didn't allude to it more in that case if he was aware of it. But the Merlin Grail is quite specific that the original round table was the Last Supper table. Then the second table, which was a copy of the Last Supper table, was the table of Joseph of Arimathea and his 12. So he's copying Jesus, basically. He has his own 12 disciples around a round table. And then the third round table was the um, round table of King Arthur. So the round table of King Arthur was based upon the Last Supper table. They were all round. And in my view, they were all copies of the Zodiac. And they were probably real. I mean, you would get your disciples and you would sit round this Zodiac. This is on the floor, of course, this mosaic. And of course, in the East, you don't really have a table. We think of this as being a table, but in the East, you sit on the floor with cushions. And so I'm expecting myself that each of the disciples would have a cushion and sit on the constellation that they were associated with.
Mm.
And then the kingly character, who in this case is Sol in the center, the Sun King, sits in the center. And I mean, this is crazy. I mean, this is a Jewish zodiac. Yeah, this is on the Sea of Galilee. This is at Hamat Tavera, right on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, just below Tiberias. And this zodiac was owned by Jesus of Gamala, who I say, of course, was the biblical Jesus. We know this because Josephus Flavius gives us a story about himself being sent to Tiberias, just south of Tiberias, to destroy the heretical images of animals that were in the palace there. And here they are. Here's the heretical images of animals. So we have this story from Josephus Flavius that he was sent to destroy this zodiac. But this is a Jewish zodiac. This would have been a Nazarene, of course, the Church of Jesus and James. And they have Helios, the Greek Helios. So this is doubly heretical. You've got heretical animals, of course, that within Judaism you're not allowed to show animals like this, especially constellations. And now you have Helios in the center. And Helios is holding a spherical Earth in his gravitational grasp. So they understood the heliocentric model of the solar system. You can see this is a sphere because it's white on one side and dark on the other side. So only a ball would be like that. And then you can see lines of longitude and latitude on it as well, these two curved golden lines.
And that
So
what is sticking out there, is that a whip?
yes, he's on his chariot, so you can't see the chariot. So
Ah,
this
okay.
is a standard depiction of Helios on his chariot with four horses. So he has a whip to whip his horses. Unfortunately, that's all been someone built a wall across it without realizing that this was a mosaic, and they dug it up, built a wall across it in ancient times, not in modern times, which is absolute crazy. But there we go. But these zodiacs are quite common. This is at Sepphoris. This is a very nice zodiac. Again, it's been damaged. And again, you see Helios in the center with the sun. And this one's got the sun and the moon together. And the chariot down here, you can see the wheels of the chariot and the four horses. And this one is being copied here. This is in a Christian church, 6th century. So the other ones are 1st century. This one is 6th century. Again, on the Sea of Galilee. This is at the Lady Mary Zodiac at oh, I've forgotten the name. It's just on the southern tip of the Sea of Galilee, anyway, the town there. And again, this has been Christianized. So we've got the sun and the moon, who are obviously Jesus and Mary, surrounded by now 12 disciples. So you can see the confluence here between the disciples and the constellations of the zodiac.
Would
But
that be
now,
Mary Magdalene?
yeah, of course, that's Mary Magdalene, of course. I mean, this is highly heretical in many respects in Christian art. And these disciples now, instead of being assigned to a particular zodiac, they're now being assigned to a particular month. But
Mm.
of course, the months and the zodiacs go round together. So they're the one and the same thing. So, and this is 6th century, and you can see our standard months in Greek. So these Aprilos, Mayos, Junios, Octobros,
Mm.
Novembros, etc. So, I mean, it's exactly the same as we use today. But this is the zodiac, but it's been Christianized. And of course, this is an Arththeran. This is very ancient, actually. This is the Winchester round table. So this is a round table of King Arthur from 800 years ago. This is quite early. And it still managed to survive in Winchester Cathedral. But they've redrawn the table. Originally, I think it would have had 12 segments, not 24. And the king, they've drawn Henry VIII here, but the king should be in the center, not as a separate part of the round table. So all of these round tables and zodiacs have traveled through from New Testament times into Arthurian history. And so the Arthurian round table should look like this. And the king should sit in the center. So not at one side. He should be in the center of the table because it is a zodiac. This is what they are recreating. The 12 knights of the round table are the 12 constellations of the zodiac. So each knight would be associated with one particular constellation, and they would sit at their table at their particular point. So all of these early religions were Sabaean. They were star worshipping religions, and Arthurian legend is no different. So what else do we have? Oh, yes, if we're talking about the Last Supper table, did we go through Last Supper tables before? I can't remember. This is a Last Supper table. This is a copy, of course, of the Leonardo table. This comes from a Christian cathedral in Ireland. This is Drogheda Cathedral, just north of Dublin. And this is in marble, of course. And you see to the right of Jesus is St. John, supposed to be disciple, but
It looks female. Yeah,
it
sorry.
does, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, she's even got a
Although
slight
we
bust.
do not know how he identified.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, yes, you would never know nowadays. But yes, it's clearly this is female. And I wrote a piece in the local paper in Ireland about this, and they said, no, 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 of course it's male. No, it's not male. Clearly, this is Jesus and Mary Magdalene. But I found this one surprising because this is in a Catholic cathedral in Ireland, one of the last places you would think of finding Mary Magdalene as the wife of Jesus. Anyway, so there she is. This is the same. This is in Turku, which is the old capital of Finland before it changed to Helsinki. And again, this is the main cathedral in Turku. And male or female? Well, I think that's female. And more than that, she's in the colors of Mary Magdalene. Remember, there
Mm.
is a uniform here. So if you see blue and white, then that is Mary the mother. If you see green and gold, green and orange, then that is Mary Magdalene. So they're even identifying her as Mary Magdalene, as the wife.
Does that also have to do with the House of Orange?
It could do. It might be why. Yes, it is, because the House of Orange is based on an orange, literally on the fruit, an orange. That is the symbol of orange in the south of France, which is where the Dutch House of Orange came from. The Dutch came from southern France. From the city of Orange, there is a city called Orange in the south of France, and its coat of arms is three oranges.
Mm.
But of course, if you hold up an orange, it's a solar symbol. It's an orange circle in the sky, and it's known as an or, as in orange, which means gold. It's a golden circle in the sky. It is the sun. So it's a solar symbol. And that's where the orange of the House of Orange came from. Yes, and I say in my book, I haven't got a copy here, I don't think. Anyway, my book, Mary Magdalene, the what's the title of that book? Mary Magdalene, Princess of Provence or something. Anyway, Mary Magdalene went to Provence in the south of France. That is a common story that you get in the region, that Mary Magdalene went to France, and she came ashore at Marie de la Mare in the south of France and went up the Rhone, because that's the Rhone River down there. She went up the Rhone, and I say that she actually went to Orange. That was her city, because her sister, Martha, went up to Tarascon, which is the next city up the Rhone, where we had the Tarasque monster that she tamed, which I'm not sure if I've got a picture of. Um,
And just briefly, also what you can see, they both have this hand gesture. With the Jesus character, you see it very clearly. The ring finger and the middle finger together.
yes.
And her left hand does a similar thing, although it is not that pronounced. But yeah, you have definitely this M sign, which to at least from what I know, points to a goddess.
Yes, well, Mary would have been an incarnation of Isis.
Hmm.
All of these princesses and queens were an incarnation of Isis. And you often see it in Christian cathedrals. You will see Mary the Mother, and on her lapel, she will have a star. And that star is the star of Venus, because she is Venus, because Isis is Aphrodite, and Aphrodite is Venus. She is the star of Venus. So, yes, she would have been identified with Isis,
Mm.
who was the primary goddess of this region, in all of this region. She became, because her Egyptian name is Ast. She wasn't called Isis at all. Her name is Ast, which became Astarte, Ashtoreth, all of the other ones. Ast means star, as in asterisk.
Or Esther?
Esther, yes, that means star as well. Of course, Esther means star, which comes from Ast. And she was Isis. Isis is the Greek version. I don't know how they managed to get Isis out of it, but in Egyptian, her name is Ast. And she is the primary goddess of the whole of the Roman Empire and the Persian and Parthian empires as well.
That
and
is
here's one.
Leonardo coming up, yeah?
Yes, here's Leonardo, but this is not Leonardo. I mean, obviously, this is a copy,
Yeah,
an
yeah.
exact copy. This is actually a mosaic, I think. It's not even a painting.
Mm.
This is the Last Supper by Napoleon. So this is later.
But also here you can see these groups of three.
Yes, you
Yeah,
can,
and
can't you?
Jesus in the middle.
Yes, yes.
Mm.
I think you might be right on that. That this is the seasons. This is
Yeah.
spring, summer, autumn, and winter, and you've got the three seasons of the zodiac. But instead of going around, because they are grouped as such on the zodiac. I'm just going back up again. You can't quite see it, but in the corners you will see the seasons.
Mm.
And I don't know which is which. That's probably winter down the bottom there. Anyone who knows their zodiac will knows which constellations are with which season.
Yeah, Sagittarius, Scorpio, Capricorn, that would be winter.
Mm. So, yes, this is the Napoleon
Mm.
uh, Last Supper table. So this is 18th century, 19th century, whenever Napoleon was around. 19th century, isn't it? And again, it's an exact copy of Leonardo. And who is the St. John on the left? Well, let's zoom in and have a look. Male or female?
Female.
I mean, it's most definitely female. I mean, this is so obvious; it's untrue. Only modern politicians could not identify what's the. I mean, I kid you not. Our current prime minister, Starmer, was asked what a woman is, and he could not identify what a woman was.
It's a female adult. What is so hard about that?
Well, he had to be told by the Supreme Court because he didn't know himself. But anyway, that's beside the point. Yes, it's obviously a female, and she's in the colors of Mary Magdalene again. So she's in the green and orange, or in this case, slightly a reddy orange of Mary Magdalene. And of course, she is blonde, like Mary Magdalene would have been blonde, because this is the ginger monarchy. This is why, of course, when you get the Dutch monarchy, we're talking about Mary Magdalene going to Orange in southern France. And then they were kicked out of Orange by Louis XIV. When's that? 17th century? I keep forgetting when Louis is. No, maybe a bit later, 18th century. And
They
they
had so
fled.
many Louis.
Yeah, this one was the 14th, Louis the Great, the Sun King.
Yeah, no, wasn't that 1600 something?
I forget when he was, but they were kicked out. This was about the time of the Huguenots being kicked out, because the Huguenots were part of this. They were Protestants, of course. And a lot of the Huguenots went down to Orange because the Orangites were sort of Protestant. And then they got kicked out by Louis XIV, and a lot of them went to.
This was the public hour. For full access of the entire interview, please join our Patreon community. Thank you.